Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. President Trump is firing back at Democrats as they threaten to subpoena the White House for documents related to his now infamous July conversation with Ukraine's president.
This is a hoax. This is the greatest hoax. This is just a continuation of what's been playing out, John, for the last, since my election, I would say, if you want to. Probably, we'll find out soon, but probably even before my election. This is a fraudulent crime on the American people, but we'll work together with Shifty Schiff and Pelosi and all of them, and we'll see what happens because we did absolutely. I had a great call with the president of Ukraine. It was 100%.
President Trump also took aim at House Intelligence Committee Chair Adam Schiff, following a New York Times report that said Schiff got an early account of the whistleblower's complaint at the center of the Democrats' impeachment inquiry. Schiff
is a fraud. Well, I think it's a scandal that he knew before. I go a step further. I think he probably helped write it.
The House Intelligence Committee said it did not review or receive the complaint ahead of time. Earlier in the day, Schiff, alongside House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, told the White House it must comply with Democrats' requests or brace for a legal showdown.
We want to make it abundantly clear that any effort by the Secretary, by the President, or anyone else to interfere with the Congress's ability to call before it relevant witnesses will be considered as evidence of obstruction of the lawful functions of Congress.
Also on Capitol Hill Wednesday, the State Department's Inspector General briefed congressional aides about President Trump's contacts with Ukraine. Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin said the State Department Inspector General gave everyone a packet of, quote, hallucinatory, propagandistic suggestions. He also said it's not clear where it came from.
Put it this way, if I had to guess who was behind it, if it really did not come directly from the White House, I would guess that it was Giuliani, but I have no way to know. Giuliani's name is all over it. There are a series of memos in there where Giuliani was present. And so somebody should ask Giuliani whether he knows anything about this.
The briefing comes after Secretary of State Mike Pompeo admitted he was on the Ukraine call. It's a conversation he is characterizing as innocent, saying it was about helping boost that country's economy and ridding its government of corruption. To help break all of this down, we are joined by CBS News Capitol Hill producer Rebecca Kaplan, White House and national politics reporter for Axios Alayna Treene, and CBSN legal contributor and former assistant United States attorney in New York's Eastern District, Keir Dougall. Welcome to all of you. Rebecca, I want to start with you. The State Department's Inspector General held a briefing with, we saw Representative Raskin and congressional aides today. What more can you tell us about what was discussed?
Well, as we just heard Congressman Raskin tell us in that bite right there, it was one of the stranger things, and we hadn't really been expecting this given the heightened tensions going on right now between Secretary Pompeo and Congress over Congress demanding that some State Department employees come testify. We thought it could possibly be something related to State Department efforts to stop employees from coming to testify on Capitol Hill, but in fact it was this strange packet of materials that seemed almost amateurish, as Raskin said. They purported to come from the White House. There was a cover sheet that said it came from the White House, and several of the documents were made to look, Raskin said, as if they were written on stationery from the Trump hotels. But he said it was just too amateurish. It was very, very unlikely this did actually come from the White House. This packet of documents was sent to Pompeo, the Secretary of State, several months ago, and at the time the Investigator General turned it over to the FBI but didn't do anything else with that packet. He said now, given everything that's going on, he thought it was best to hand it over to Congress, and so he was presenting those materials today during that briefing. Raskin was, as far as we know, the only lawmaker to attend. Otherwise, it was attended entirely by staff because members are back in their districts for a congressional recess right now. But it was very, very strange, and Raskin said that he thought it really was kind of a distraction from this larger impeachment question that Democrats are looking into at the moment.
Can you help us understand, Keir, why might the Inspector General feel compelled to pass along these kinds of materials where the provenance, as we've just pointed out, is very much in question and unclear right now?
Well, it's hard to know because we don't really know what these materials are. But one of the things, if you're an Inspector General, that you want to maintain is your independence. It is critical to do your job. And so under these circumstances, sitting on materials that are potentially relevant to an investigation like this, where they're apparently unclassified, according to Mr. Raskin. There's an ongoing investigation. That is something that you could do to protect your independence. The Inspector General may also have been concerned about reporting that might have suggested that these documents were more than what they actually were, as an effort to avoid speculation. But I think principally the concern would have been about independence.
Interesting. And Keir, let me ask you, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo confirmed today that he was on the July 25th call. Democrats have said if that's the case, he is now a, quote, fact witness. So what does that mean for Secretary Pompeo moving forward?
So this is, again, leading into questions about independence and potential conflicts of interest. Look, this is a very important phone call. It is something where there are credible allegations about abuse of power, strong-arming the president of the Ukraine for the president's personal interest. To the extent that the Secretary of State was personally on that call, that makes him a witness, a fact witness about the call. When we see the transcript, there are certain places where there are ellipses. It's been represented to us to be a summary of the call and not a verbatim transcript. That places him potentially square in the middle of answering questions about exactly what was said during the full duration of that call. So it is potentially very significant for him.
So, ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Bob Menendez, is calling on Secretary of State Pompeo to recuse himself from any Ukraine-related matters, citing his potential conflict of interest in this. From a legal perspective, Keir, is that a fair request?
I think it is, although we have to be very careful, right? Because any kind of spurious allegation that could cause someone with a job that's as important as the Secretary of State, any kind of random allegation that could create the appearance of a conflict, that should not rise to the level where you're interfering with the president's foreign policy as directed through the duly appointed Secretary of State. However, here, we've got a transcript that's been provided by the White House where we're told that it is a summary of the president's own words that the Secretary of State himself participated in. That creates a conflict of interest to protect the president here, potentially, and to protect Mr. Pompeo himself to the extent that he's a witness in the investigation. I think it's a reasonable and potentially prudent request that he recuse himself here.
So getting back to that New York Times report that House Intel Chairman Adam Schiff got an early warning about the whistleblower's account, GOP Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel calls this a, quote, stunning indictment of this impeachment charade, end quote, and goes on to question who's colluding now. Alayna, what is the strategy here on behalf of the Republican Party?
Well, the Republican Party and the president's allies, including those in the White House, are using the same strategy that they had used throughout the Russia investigation and Robert Mueller's work. We saw the president himself discredit Robert Mueller during that investigation and the intelligence community as a whole. And we're seeing the same tactics applied now with regard to the Ukraine investigation. We saw this play out when the acting director of national intelligence, Jerry Maguire, testified last week. It feels like it was longer ago, but it was only just last week. And we saw people question the credibility of his work, the credibility of the other intelligence officials also involved in handling the whistleblower complaint and this investigation. And we've seen several lawmakers. I spoke to many Republicans on the Hill last week who said this is Russia 2.0. This is the same thing. We're going down the same road. Of course, Democrats totally disagree. They argue that this is an entirely different investigation, and that's why they are opening an impeachment inquiry into this, into Ukraine alone. But from the White House point of view, and I think that quote by the RNC chairwoman really just stands to show that they're using the same exact playbook that they did when the Mueller investigation was playing out.
So, Alayna, given that, President Trump says the White House is willing to work with Pelosi and Schiff as it relates to documents pertaining to the impeachment inquiry, the same inquiry he calls a hoax, how likely is it that the White House complies with this latest round of requests?
Well, so from my conversations with people within the White House over the past several days, they are planning to use the same strategy that they did, or that they have been really since January, when they've been subpoenaed or been asked to bring forth documents. They've been not very willing to do so. Officials say they're planning to do the same thing now. They plan to use executive privilege in cases where it applies. They plan to keep as many conversations that the president had with others confidential and continue to keep those private. I think really what could end up happening here is that some of these House committees go to the courts about this. If they subpoena someone, they've subpoenaed Rudy Giuliani, they've subpoenaed Secretary of State Mike Pompeo for several documents and for testimony. And if the White House holds them back from doing so, or if they don't comply, I'm pretty sure, and from my conversations with people within the House on these House committees, they're planning to go to the courts about this. Of course, there's an issue there because a lot of people are worried about running out the clock and worrying that the elections, they're only 13 months away, so they only have so much time to go through this process. But so far, that's what Republicans in the White House are planning to do with regard to these subpoenas.
Rebecca, I want to ask you about messaging. It is our understanding the White House has not established a war room to respond to impeachment, as has traditionally been the case in other instances. Are congressional Republicans expressing any concern about how the White House is handling this?
That's not really something that we've heard yet, although they have been away from the Capitol for several days during the congressional recess. But largely what they're doing, which is frankly what we see them do a lot, is taking their cues directly from the president. And the president, as we've seen, has been going after Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff on Twitter. So this morning you saw Representative Andy Biggs introduce a resolution to censure Schiff for what he said was making up parts of the phone call between the president and the Ukrainian president during a hearing last week. And then later today, Kevin McCarthy, the Republican leader here on the House side, said that he tweeted that Schiff had made up the entire whistleblower complaint, which is, of course, something we know is not true. Both Schiff and the attorney for the whistleblower have said that the complaint came directly from the whistleblower himself. It was not written by the House Intelligence Committee. But they're just taking their cues directly from what the president is doing and following that strategy of trying to discredit anything about this phone call, about the whistleblower himself. And that's really often the most successful strategy for Republicans. The president is a one-man messenger. He takes what he has to say directly to Twitter. So for them, they look there. They look where all of us look, where journalists and the public look, and they say, that's what we're going to talk about today. And that's what we've seen so far.
So the Trump campaign released an ad echoing the president's claim that Democrats are staging a coup. Keir, given what we know about Congress's powers to investigate, and specifically with regards to an impeachment inquiry, for instance, what is your assessment of that claim that this is a coup?
Look, the common definition of a coup d'etat is the violent overthrow of a government. The overthrow of a government through violence. Our Constitution has specific provisions in it that permit the removal of a president upon impeachment by the House and conviction in the Senate. In that case, the removal of the president would be through votes, not through violence. So the claim that this is a coup is really specious.
And Alayna, in using that word and that kind of messaging, what is the strategy here for the White House?
I think the coup could be the new hoax or the new witch hunt. We've heard President Trump use hoax and witch hunt to describe the Russia investigation. This could be what he's using to describe Ukraine. It's yet to be seen. But I think that it's very important to keep tabs on what the president says and what he said today during his press conference, because he's a brander. He's someone who likes to brand people, he'll brand the whistleblower just like he did Robert Mueller, and he's branding House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff, Shifty Schiff, or other words that he's been using to describe these people involved in the investigation. And it's his way of trying to, in many ways, discredit the credibility, really, of the whistleblower and of the people who are engaging in these investigations.
Yeah, I mean, Alayna, it's such an excellent point, because we have seen in the past the president has been, some might say, masterful in that respect, branding political opponents very quickly in a way that really does seem to stick, at least in the minds of some voters.
Definitely, and we see that these are common phrases he uses on Twitter, which he says, he very much often says is his way of just getting to voters and to viewers directly. And so he'll just hammer the point home over and over again so that it sticks in people's minds. And that's definitely something that he's trying to do here. And similar to what he's trying to do, honestly, with Joe Biden and kind of where all of this Ukraine investigation really began. He's trying to paint Joe Biden and his son Hunter as corrupt, and he's going to continue using that line of messaging so that it sticks in voters' minds before they head to the polls in 2020.
All right, Rebecca Kaplan, Alayna Treene, and Keir Dougall, thanks to all of you. Really appreciate it.